Becky Lawlor is a B2B tech writer who helps brands create thought-leading content through original research. So it's exactly her wheelhouse. Becky, are you around? As Becky is getting her, she is trying to join, she's saying. Well, let's see how the trial works out. So what Becky is going to talk about is how to begin using original research in your content, even when you're time and resource strapped marketer. That sounds like all of us, except you, HubSpot people. All right, Becky's here. Welcome. The stage is yours.
Great. I'm really excited to be here and talking about a subject that I'm really passionate about in content marketing, which is original research. And I know that Michelle Lynn just talked to you, and she went in depth on survey-based research. I am going to take a slightly different angle. Let me just share my PDF presentation here real quick. Great. So I am going to talk about, Michelle went really in depth on how to do original research using surveys. And I want to come at this at a little different angle because you certainly can do the way Michelle described, and it's a really valuable way. But I've talked to a lot of B2B marketers who want to start engaging with original research, but they feel a little bit overwhelmed about how to do it. It seems really complicated, time intensive, and expensive to do, and so they end up just kind of kicking the tires and not really getting into it. So my goal with this presentation is that you come out with a way to use original data in your content, even when you have minimal time and resources. So I want you to think of this as your minimal viable product. We're all SaaS marketers here, so this is your version 1.0 to just get going with original research. So before I dive into how to do this, I want to just talk briefly about why you should be using original research in your content marketing. This is actually from a research report that Michelle did at Mantis Research with BuzzSumo, a partnership. We were just talking about partnerships, but less than 50% of content marketers are currently using original research in their content. So this creates an opportunity for you to get ahead of the curve. I mean, my prediction is that we're going to see more and more marketers using original research because its engagement is so high and there's so many benefits to using it. So the sooner you step into the arena and start using original research in your content, the better for you. You know, one of the things that as marketers and as content producers we're all dealing with is that there's a massive amount of content out there, and there's a massive amount of competition to get engagement with the content that we create. So one of the things that original research provides is it's unique and it's novel, and right there you have an advantage over your competitors and the other content that is in your space, because people want something that's unique and interesting. It can also really help you build your brand's thought leadership and generate greater brand awareness. If you think about the industry leader in almost any space, Salesforce, LinkedIn, Content Marketing Institute, what do they all have in common? They have all invested in producing original research. And it can also help you increase backlinks and get more media mentions. BuzzSumo has reported that their original research content gets far more links than any other type of content on their site. And finally, it can help you uncover new content ideas. This is a constant struggle for all of us. And your data, especially if you are doing survey-based data where you're digging into maybe your audience's pain points or concerns or what they care about, can lead you to ideas that you can write on about how to help them solve their pain points and really be or educate them on things that they're struggling with. So now that I've kind of gone into why you need original research, I want to talk about how you do this. So I've put together a 5-step game plan for original research. You want to determine which type of data to collect. You need to define your research goal. You need to analyze your data. You need to find the story inside the data. And then finally, you need to create and publish this data and get it out in the world where people can engage with it. So let's dive into those steps. So the first step is to determine what type of data to collect. When you're thinking about original research, there are 3 types of data that you can use. You can use internal data, third-party data, or survey-based data. And the reason I'm presenting all 3 here is because everybody's situation is going to be unique. What you have accessible at your organization, what types of tools that you have at your disposal to use. So I want to walk through all 3 types so that as we think about this from that minimum viable product perspective, you can be thinking about which type of data would be easiest and most cost effective for me to collect and use. So internal data is the first type of data, and this is data that is exclusive to your brand that nobody else has access to. This can be sales and trends metrics, it can be software user trends, operational trends, marketing data, internal initiatives, HR data. These are just some ideas. The sky is really the limit. You know, start thinking about what data you have in your organization that could be interesting to your audience and to the media as well. To give you a couple examples of how I've seen people use their internal data, number 26 is a European online baking startup, and they celebrated their first year and the gaining of 100,000 users in that year by putting together a little infographic, and they just pulled some of their customer data out, like what the demographic of their customers is, what age groups they are, where they're located, and also things like where they send money to, and what types of activities they like to spend their money on. Let's see. Another example is Spotify. They use they gather all their data around, you know, streaming, how what people are streaming, and they actually have a page on their website devoted to sharing their internal data. It's called Culture and Trends. You can go there, and they update it frequently with different data. Currently, I pulled this a couple days ago. What they have on there is the 5 most streamed female artists in the world and the top 5 global podcasts hosted by the world by women. Maybe this is, I think, Women's Month is starting in March, so maybe they're kind of teeing these up for that month, or maybe they're just here randomly. But anyway, this because they're always putting new content out there, or new data about what their users are streaming, it drives engagement and traffic to their website. Here's another example, Kaspersky. They are a cybersecurity solution company, and so they have created a real-time cyber threat map that shows, they have actually a globe as well. I wasn't kind of able to get a screenshot of it as it was moving, but that shows where all over the globe cyber threats are occurring and how often they're occurring, and stats on what types of threats they're seeing out there. So again, this is just a couple of examples of how you can use internal data. Suggest you kind of put on your creative thinking hat and begin to think about what data you have accessible and how you might use it in an engaging way. So the next type of data you can use is third-party data. And when I'm talking about third-party data, I want to be clear, I'm not talking about going out and looking for statistics and using somebody else's original research in your content. I'm talking about using public data that you analyze for unique findings. And you want to use this data in a way that highlights your expertise. It doesn't have to be a large sample size. Again, we are focused on getting something out the door here. And I know when we talk about, we want to be credible with it, there's a lot you can do with 50, 100, or 200 data points that can still be very credible and interesting and engaging to your audiences, as I'm going to show you in an example here in just a minute. So I also wanted to give you an idea of like where can you go to find this third-party data. There are hundreds, thousands, probably even millions of third-party databases out here, but to just kind of give you a list to get started, the U.S. Census Bureau, Socrata is a government-related database, if that's of interest to your audience. Pew Research has some data. They make some of their data public in databases. Better Business Bureau, Google Trends, there are search databases. So those are just some ideas. And in this next example, I'm going to show you, you don't even have to necessarily use a public databases. There are other ways to gather third-party data. Most of you are probably familiar with Andy Crestodina, and he's actually a major user of third-party data. I love seeing the content that he comes out using third-party data. This is just one example of the ways he's used it. He wanted to answer the question of what is the average website lifespan. To do this, he actually used Alexa to rank the top 200 websites out there, and then he used the Wayback Machine to go back in time and see when each of these websites was last updated, and he came out with the data point of 2 years and 7 months. So again, a very small 200 size sample. You could even choose to go down to 100 or 50 depending on what you're doing. It doesn't have to be a large sample. And here he actually just gathered one data point, which was about the length of time between updates. But then he was able to use this third-party data to build content that aligned with his company's own expertise about building websites and effectively updating those. Okay, the third type of data that is out there is survey-based data. And if you just watched Michelle Lynn's presentation before mine, she went quite in depth to this. If you weren't able to watch that, I would recommend that you go back and find time to watch that. I'm going to keep this pretty high level. She goes into a much deeper dive, but the information I'm going to provide is enough for the type of project we're doing here, which again is that minimum viable project to get something out the door. And I do want to iterate that this is still credible the way we're doing this. We're just not trying to be the next Salesforce or and survey 5,000 marketers. We are just trying to get something that is viable for you with a little bit of when you don't have a lot of time or resources. So the first thing around survey-based data is where will you find your audience? There are a couple of ways to reach an audience. Email is, or email, combine it with your social media audience, however you want to do that. You can create a survey and send it out to there. This can be challenging though, as was discussed. You have to have a pretty large and pretty engaged audience, even to get a 100 to 200 range response. For example, I recently worked with a client. They sent out to, they have an email list of 51,000 subscribers, I think they sent out to, and we got 167 credible responses back. So if you don't have that size of list or that level of engagement, then you need to be thinking about how else can you reach your audience. The second option is through a partnership. And again here though, it can be a little tricky to find a partner that has a large enough email list that is not a competitor but has overlapping interests and has access to the same audience, and that it would make sense to partner with. But it is an opportunity to explore, and I'm putting all the opportunities out there so that you can think about which ones make sense for your situation. The final way is through a paid panel. Now, we are trying to keep this very cost effective, so a paid panel isn't ideal, but you can survey either consumers or B2B professionals using a paid panel. And again, Michelle will go into more detail about this, but you can look up a paid panel and you can select the type of person you want to reach out to and survey through that. Costs can range from low end for consumers, they can be down to $2 or $3 per response, to above $30 a response if you're looking to survey, B2B, C-suite, executive level professionals. So there's a wide range in there. One thing that can help you keep costs down is when we get into this next question is how many responses do you need? Just like third-party data, for what our purposes are here, you do not need a large survey sample. You need about 100 to 200 to be credible. And a lot of publications will pick up even at that level, especially if you're looking at trade publications. I've talked to several PR specialists about this to kind of make sure that that's a range that media would be interested in. So then the last question here is, as you're putting together a survey, is how long should your survey be? And I think of this with the process that we're doing here. This is like a pulse survey. This is just a quick heartbeat on your audience. We're just trying to get a small amount of data together that could be used to create a piece of interesting content. So I would recommend that you keep it fairly short, 7 to 10 questions. A couple of those may be demographic questions to help you better understand who your audience is, like what their title is or the size of their company or where they're located, just depending what's important to you. And then the other 5 to 7 questions should be the questions that you want to ask. So just to wrap up this step, because there was a lot of pieces in it, your MVB play here, to keep this simple, is to choose the type of data that is easiest, quickest, and least costly for you to collect. Use tools that you have in-house and that are free to collect that data. One thing I didn't hit on is survey tools. You will need to use some type of survey tool to create your survey. Typeform, Google Forms have some free options. There are a lot of other options out there that are also free or low cost. And finally, keep the amount of data you collect manageable so that you can just get this done and it won't take too much time or resources. Okay, so the second step here is to define your research goals. You want to be thinking about, you've identified what type of data will be easiest for you to collect. Now you need to think about if this data can give you new insights so that it would be interesting. Or how can you use the data to measure performance, such as Content Marketing Institute does a B2B content marketers benchmarking report annually. So that would be another thing you could be thinking about is, can you measure, or maybe you want to measure how mature people are delivering personalization at scale. Or do you have a hypothesis you could test? Maybe you want to know, maybe you're in cybersecurity, you want to know whether you want to test the hypothesis that large healthcare organizations experience more data breaches than small healthcare organizations. I do want to address, there's just a question that popped up, wouldn't research goals come before defining the data source selection? I debated this a lot in how to order this. I think it's a chicken or egg thing in this case, because you want to make sure that you have a type of data that is easy for you to collect. So really you can order these either way. If it's easier for you to define your research goals, you could do that and then figure out what type of data. But I didn't want you to sort of define your research goals and then feel like you didn't have a type of data that you could collect. So sometimes it's looking at what type of data you have available and thinking how you could then use that. So the third step here is analyze your data. Once you've collected it and you've decided, you've been thinking about what you can get out of it, you want to cluster your findings into themes. This will help you in the next step when you're creating a story to tell with your data. So here again, as an example, if you surveyed marketing professionals on their marketing technology, maybe your first bucket, theme bucket is, their frustrations or pain points with using marketing technology. Maybe the second bucket is what their purchasing criteria is, and your third theme bucket could be what their attitudes are of interacting with IT to support them in using their marketing technology. You also want to look for surprising or contrary results. These are always interesting and engaging, and it would be a great way to surface your data. And then thirdly, I just want to hit on that it's perfectly okay to admit data that doesn't fit anywhere. I would just caution here, though, that you want to be careful and not cherry pick data. Sometimes, even when there's data that maybe didn't fit your hypothesis or isn't telling the story that you would love to tell, sometimes there's a real value in publishing that anyway, because you're really building credibility and trust with your audience. So it's okay to admit data, but understand why you're admitting it, because it's not interesting or it doesn't fit with the story that you're trying to tell, not because you just don't want to share the data. The next step is to uncover the story within your data. And I put up here, this is an example. I worked with Adobe on, this was a survey-based report that they put out, and it was a large survey sample size, but again, we're not trying to be Adobe here, but in this case, they did survey 5,000 consumers and 2,000 marketers, and their target audience is marketers. And so one of the things that they thought that their marketers would be interested in, especially in light of GDPR and the California Consumer Protection Act, which have come out, this was done about a year ago, so when these things were kind of surfacing, was they wanted to understand more about how consumers felt about data collection practices, data security and privacy, and how marketers thought consumers felt about how they were engaging with them when they collected their data. So the second question around that was, does that topic align with your brand story? And here again, not only does Adobe focus specifically on helping marketers use data to create great customer experiences, they also really try to be a thought leader about ethical data practices, and so this angle really fit well for them. And the third piece, when you're thinking about the story you want to tell, is, does the data reveal something new or interesting on this topic? And that's one of the great things with original research, is almost always yes, because it's original, somebody hasn't already collected this data. In this case, we decided to call this the new data deal and really talk about, because what we saw in the data was there was a discrepancy. Consumers didn't feel like there was enough transparency, and they also didn't feel like marketers were maybe giving them enough value for the information they were giving marketers, whereas marketers had felt pretty good that they were doing a good job. So there was a discrepancy. So we approached this from the angle of marketers need to make a new deal with consumers where they need to be more transparent, and they need to be more empathetic, and they needed to be delivering more value in personalizing the experiences and things like that when they in exchange for this data. So this is one example of, you know, kind of how you could go about uncovering the story within your data, and that was a survey-based example. This one is using internal data. CallRel examined, they are a call tracking and analytics solution, and they looked at their call tracking data from pre-pandemic through to, this was done at the end of summer, so they looked at through end of August, early September, examining over 100 million phone calls to see how small and mid-sized businesses were adapting to the pandemic. And they came out with a lot of interesting insights. They also looked across industries, because they track a whole bunch of different industries, so they could look at how healthcare industry, you know, what their call metrics looked like compared to marketing or automotive, and things like that. And one of the interesting findings that came out that would be really engaging to their audience is that while call volume definitely dropped in the spring, that March through May period, where most communities across the US experienced a government mandated lockdown and shutdown of a lot of businesses, so call volume dropped dramatically, as you can see in this graph. But what's really interesting is that as businesses reopened, and by the end of the summer, not only had call volume and call duration and a couple other metrics they were tracking risen, it actually had quite substantially exceeded call volume prior to the pandemic. So again, this was a great story for them to be able to tell their audience, and it was a double win-win because it highlighted the value of their actual product, call tracking. Another example of finding that story is with third-party data is with Stratified. They are an AI driven text analysis solution, and I'm not going to go into all the details because we're actually in the process of getting this out to publication, so I don't want to spoil the story before they publish it. But they used their tool to analyze 4,000 entries of a public database relevant to the financial service industry, which is a target audience for them. And they used the data to highlight the value of their solution in driving insights. They uncovered some really interesting trends and patterns around customer experience in this database that they analyzed. And so they're going to be able to publish a report that here again is going to give their audience really new, interesting insights about the customer experience, and also about, you know, maybe where some of their competitors had fallen short, and what types of interactions had frustrated customers. And again, similar to Colorado, this is a great opportunity for them because they're also able to highlight the value of their own solution here in helping their audience find these kinds of insights and trends. So the last step is to create and publish. And as you can see from this infographic, there are multitude of ways you can use your original research in your content. Going back to that minimal viable product piece of this, I want you all to just think of which type of content would be easiest, most cost-effective for you and your organization to publish. That may be a blog post, or it may be getting a couple of thought leaders together from your organization and putting together a quick 30-minute webinar to talk about the data. It may just be starting with social media posts to just get it out the door. Point here is to create, publish, and just get something out the door so you can see how your audience engages with it. And then from there, build your confidence with this and see how it does. And from there, you can begin to refine and iterate. And also when you see strong engagement, I think it gives you the ability to come back and make a case for investing further and maybe deeper in original research. So just to sum up and kind of go back over the 5 steps to kind of just get something out the door and get going with original research. Think about choosing the easiest data to collect. Focus on data that will benefit your audience. Use free or inexpensive tools to do this. And keep the amount of data you collect small. And then finally, pick a low-effort way to quickly publish your data. So I hope this was kind of helpful and gives you a way to visualize and think about how you can get started, and that you don't need to wait to do something really big. And I would love to see what you guys create. So I am active on LinkedIn, and if you ever want to share something that you have created, please ping me. Thank you.
Becky, thank you so much. Yeah, I have time for questions, and let's dive in. Some dude named Derek is here asking, beyond partnerships, is there anything we can do during topic selection or data collection to improve distribution of original research?
Okay, so he's just to clarify, do you think he's asking them like when he's publishing it, like to get more people?
So before you do the research, I think something that it's about distribution predominant, I think, and I see Derek is typing in a clarification, but I think it's like, how can you use the choices we make during content creation that help distribution?
Okay, so I mean, I think you can think about, if you're thinking about you want to get it out for media mentions or backlinks or things like that, I mean, I think you need to think about not just what your target audience is interested in, but what your target media is interested in. I do think, you know, trade publications are a great place to kind of start this, you know, distribution journey. They are actually often quite hungry for new and interesting content, and original research provides that. You could reach out, I mean, if you really wanted to be proactive, you could reach out to some of these trade publications prior and kind of, you know, if you have a few thoughts in mind, ask them, you know, try to get a hold of an editor and say, hey, you know, if I were to do X, Y, Z, which of these three would be of more interest to you?
What is a trade publication?
So a trade publication might be like if you were focused on, let's say you're B2B retail tech. So maybe that is, of course, I'm going blank right now. What some of those trade publications are, I'm thinking of Retail Dive, but they're kind of
Retail Insights.
But yeah, Retailer Insights, you know,
Shop.org type of stuff.
so anything that's in that kind of space that publishes around, you know, or like if you're in healthcare technology, there's HIT, there's a couple other, you know, publications. So you would want to reach out to some of those if you really want them to influence it. I mean, I would suggest that you just think about, if you're really thinking about what's going on in your space, then you're probably going to come up with something that's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. Shuba is asking a really long question, so let me read this. How do you make sure you don't spend a whole bunch of time and money on a topic where the results are meh or nice to have, but your audience wouldn't miss if you had never done the research? Do you do a pre-roll to see what would get traction? Other ways to reduce the risk?
Well, I think that's the point of what I just kind of walked through. Is this is a way to reduce the risk because you're not spending a lot of time or money here. You are just getting something out the door, and you're seeing how it performs, and that's going to give you some indication. I think, you know, as you do this more and more, you're going to get more sophisticated about, you know, what is going to interest your audience and be more than a nice to have. But some of this is, you know, everything in marketing is a little bit of trial and error, I think. And so what I don't want you to do is sit there and think that you have to be able to solve this problem right away, right? Like, I have to know I can't invest, and so I'm just not going to do it because I don't want to waste 20 grand and find out that it was not, you know, the results I wanted. So that's the whole point of this, is do it. Just do it small and simple and get something out there, and then begin to build upon that.
Right. Yeah. I do remember stories from CXL where when we were doing original research, comparing what works better, A or B, and after like 2 weeks of, you know, gathering data and analyzing, the answer was there was no difference. Then we had no story. So many times we did waste, you know, a couple $1,000 and then time. Sad. All right. Let me check the chat here as well. Publications. Okay, I think we got it. So thank you very much, Becky, and we'll find you on LinkedIn.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.